My name again is Tanya Eni, and I'm with Alliance Solutions Group, and we'll be talking today about modern construction financials in Sage Intacct. So first of all, for those of you that are new to maybe Sage Intacct and learning about this product, what is Sage Intacct? Well, it's a best-in-class ERP. At core, it handles accounts payable, general ledger. It's got a report writer, does purchasing, job costing, accounts receivable. But it also has bank feeds, an open API to connect other products to it, budgeting and planning module that's a very advanced budgeting and planning tool. It's cloud-based. It has workflow approvals that you can build into the system. It can handle and manage expense reports. It has dashboards that we'll be taking a look at today, as well as it can do inventory. There's an allocations area that you can set up automatic allocations. It can handle multi-currency if you have that need, as well as intercompany accounting. Prepaid expense amortization. So if you have insurance or other expenses that you want to amortize, you can set up a schedule and it will do it for you. And it can also manage fixed assets instead of having to have that outside of the system. So as you can see, it can do quite a bit. In turn, for the construction edition that they released in March of last year, they've also partnered with some strategic partners, such as TimberScan. So for those of you that are familiar with TimberScan from using it with Sage 300, they have a version that's called Titanium that works with Sage Intacct. We also have a partnership with Procore to integrate Procore in with Intacct. And for the residential builders, Hyphen Solutions to handle project management, and Workforce Go for managing payroll. But let's move on to what you guys came to learn about more today, which is, what do modern financials look like? Well, I think what they look like, and what they look like in Sage Intacct, is the ability to drill down to access your data. And that data is real time, that I can automate delivery of that data. It easily exports to Excel, dashboard views, consolidated views of my data if I've got multiple company or divisions or departments. Being able to filter on the fly that data. And a very easy report writer, one that I can do myself, that I don't have to hire a consultant or take extensive training courses in. And a very flexible work breakdown structure. And I think you'll see through looking at Sage Intacct today, the overview that I'm going to give you, you'll see that we can handle all these things that comprise what modern financials look like. And where that all starts is in our flexible general ledger. We can simplify your chart of accounts. We don't require batch posting, so you can choose to post as you go, or you may develop a workflow approval that transactions have to be approved before they're posted. You can also close out subsidiary ledgers independently, hoping to speed up the whole time it takes to close the month. We can also handle multiple books, so we can even enter a transaction once to multiple books. We can set up user-definable books, which we'll look at, statistical journals to track some of that non-financial information that forces us to go outside to Excel to be able to report on, and we can define workflows. One of the big features of Sage Intacct is consolidation and the ability to really slice and dice the data, and that starts with consolidating multiple companies. So if your business has multiple entities, multiple federal ID numbers that you're tracking separately, Sage Intacct utilizes its dimension structure to manage those. So looking at the screen here that I took of Sage Intacct, this shows a snapshot of a sample company that has got multiple companies. With Sage Intacct, they can all roll up to what we call a top level, which will allow for quick consolidation. So I can easily click on my top level consolidation, see all of the financials in one place, and then drill down to a specific company to focus on individual company transactions. This is helpful with controlling security. You can limit users' access to specific companies because maybe they can get into the general construction company, but they can't get into the residential company. So it really allows for consolidations to happen in a snap. Also with our modern financials, it extends to the projects and being able to have that project work breakdown structure. So many of you are current Stage 300 users, I have this slide kind of explaining the comparison of how it's structured in Stage Intacct. Both have a project or a job. Underneath that is your cost code, or what we call task, in Stage Intacct. And then beneath that, you have your cost type or categories. You also can have subcategories beneath that. Now, how that starts to look when we start to look at the actual setup in Stage Intacct is we can have parent-child relationships. So here you see concrete and then all these different sub-accounts underneath it. As you can see, you can have a very flexible cost code, letters, numbers, dashes. And then that translates onto our reports as bringing in that cost code detail. And we can manage and change all this information on our report. This particular report is letting us see an estimate, changes, revised estimate, and then bringing in our any commitments and actual costs. First, we're looking at the work breakdown structure. When I drill into categories or cost types, as we call it in Sage Intacct, those cost types are tied back to the general ledger, so streamlining the coding process. We also can have that parent-child relationship, as you see over here on the left-hand side. So for labor, we can further break it out between the break between burden and regular labor. So a user can roll things up to that labor grouping or break it down into the individual levels. So it allows you to get very granular. And as you can see, you really can start to then pull out this information into reports. So I think this is a common sight for most users that I talk to is using spreadsheets and more spreadsheets and more spreadsheets of exporting data out of Sage, manipulating that data. And that's now a snapshot in time that I'm reviewing it and then having to repeat the whole process again. Or maybe I am using a tool like Office Connector to bring out information, but nonetheless, I'm having to maintain those reports and formulas outside of my system, where if a user needs it, I either have to send it to them or they have to have a license. But with Sage Intacct, we're going to see how we can access all that information from dynamic dashboards. So with that, let's go take a look at Sage Intacct. So I'm logged into Sage Intacct as an admin, so I can do and see everything. You will probably have different users set up that will have different security roles in the company. They may be able to do everything, or they may be restricted to a very specific area of the product. But as you can see when you log in, right away you're greeted with a dashboard. Sage Intacct is a very dashboard driven system that most users come back to gather information. A lot of times with systems we're used to going to a report, pulling a new report, exporting that report to Excel. I think you'll begin to find with a system like Sage Intacct that we can access everything we pretty much need from our dashboard. So it really changes the way we.
Oh, Tanya, we lost your audio.
Oh, sorry about that.
Okay, you're back.
Okay.
Good.
Okay, thanks. So here on our dashboard, we're able to, you'll be able to drill down to information, even put reports that you frequently use right on the screen. So what are we looking at here? Well, again, I was mentioning that we can merge multiple companies into one place. So I'm at what we call the top level. This database that I'm in has got multiple companies in it, but I'm in the consolidated top level. So everything I'm viewing is all my different companies added together. So I can see everything in one place. I can drill down into transactions, but I can also filter. And this is going to really introduce the concept that we have in Sage Intacct, which is called dimensions. So dimensions are a classification system that we can use to organize, sort, and report on company information. So from here, I could begin to sort by those different dimensions. And a dimension could be a company, a dimension could be a location, a dimension could be a project. So if I wanted to look at maybe specific types of projects that I've categorized, I could do that, or I could sort it by a location or an entity. So maybe I want to look at just information from this company. So once I apply that filter, it will filter my dashboard and let me see that information just for that specific company. Now I could expand this filter. I can make this be a filter by project manager, by division. Really, it's up to you to bring in any type of dimension that you would like to see. Now, looking at the dashboard and what we can see here, because from so many different systems, as I mentioned, we bring a lot of this data out to Excel. But what I'm able to show right here on my dashboard for myself or a user to be able to view is information such as KPIs. So I can build out these different KPIs. We can customize this dashboard by coming up here and adding in new widgets, or I can mouse over a widget and remove it if it's something I don't want on my dashboard. Now, with these different widgets, they're all real time and drill down. So if I see that payroll expense is up and I want to investigate further, well, all I have to do is simply click on the transaction and drill into it. So here I see the comparison. I can see that we're comparing August to September. And if I want to know more about these different transactions, why this number is up this month, well, all I have to do is click on the transaction and it drills me down into it. So now I see the detail and I can continue drilling down, clicking on this amount, and it's going to drill me into the transaction. So here it was made via journal entry, and I even attached some backup that I could click on and view that backup. And I was able to do that right from my dashboard, not have to leave and go someplace else, run a secondary report, etc. Now, other things I'm seeing from this dashboard is my chatter, which is something that's very unique to Sage Intacct. This is a tool that allows users to comment on transactions. Here you see some running commentary on comments made on bills, on journal entries, even an attachment that was added. And this can either be public, that I can keep a running log that I view on my dashboard, or it can be more in a private mode that I get a little pop-up on the bubble at the top right-hand side of the screen. So this can eliminate all of the back and forth emails that we share with our colleagues. Instead of having to ask somebody or search my inbox looking for some comments back on an entry, a journal entry I was going to make, or a question I have on a transaction, and I can find it all within that particular transaction. So if I'm reviewing a transaction, like for example, this bill here, I'm going to drill into this bill. I can see now the information about the bill. I can see it's overdue, the amount, nothing's been paid on it. If I scroll down, I can see where the bill was coded to, and I can see the commentary here. So as a user, I can add this comment in, I can link files to it, attach files, and all this correspondence lives with the document. So no more hunting down backup. It all lives right here within the transaction. So by bringing our reports onto our dashboard, I can see them immediately when I log into a company or bring up that particular dashboard. And I've got two reports built into my dashboard here, a profit and loss comparing my actual to budget, and a balance sheet. Now, looking at my profit and loss, it's very simple. It just shows total revenue. I also can call out maybe some transactions or accounts that have $0 amounts by using some filtering and coloring on my reports. Now, these reports I can also drill into. So if I wanted to investigate further the revenue for the month or the period of time that the report's for, all I have to do is click on it. It drills me into it. Just like the other report, it drills me down to transactions. Now, when it takes me into the report, it brings it up for the time frame of the report that displayed. But what's great about this is that not only have I drilled into it, but I can further customize this. So maybe I want to go back a little further, or I want to change some parameters. I don't have to exit here, go someplace else, and rerun the report. I simply click Customize, and now I get into the report details where I can change the time period, I can change the range of accounts, I can even tap into those dimensions and say, I only want to look at information for a particular project or a particular vendor or customer. So as a user reviewing, auditing different periods of time or financials, it makes it very easy to drill down to that information. Now, in looking at these reports, how I can begin to modify them is very simple. So if I'm reviewing this report, maybe I want to know more. I want to change the report. Well, we have a very easy to use report writer. If I click on this pencil tool, it's going to drill me into this report and into the report writer. So right from this screen, I can begin modifying the report. Now, with some systems, I've got to go outside to an external program, or it takes some, work with a consultant or myself learning the tool. But with Sage Intacct system, it's very easy to use. Right from this report writer screen, I can begin modifying it. I may choose to duplicate this so I can always retain the original report writer form. But then it's very wizard-like. I can walk through modifying the rows. So here's all the rows of this financial statement. Now, when I drill into one of these line items, I can quickly modify what I'm going to see. So maybe I want to expand and see more detail behind that. I don't want to see just a subtotal of what my revenue was. I want to see it expanded, and I want to expand it by those dimensions. And those dimensions can be things like projects, customers. So on the fly, I could come into this financial report and say, I want to expand this by my location or by my project. And just that quickly, we're going to go back and take a look at this report and see how now all of a sudden this report's being broken out by that particular dimension. Let me do these two accounts, and let's go ahead and preview this report. So now that report is now blown out the revenue accounts. So now they're expanded, and I can see each of the different projects that made up that revenue. So instead of having to go rewrite a report and maybe build some different formulas, it's just automatically pulling from all the dimensions all the projects that contributed to revenue this month and showing it on my report. Now I can further edit this report because the report's not only made up of rows, it's made up of columns. So the columns, I can add in additional columns. Right now my report shows an actual cost column, a budget, and then a variance. Maybe I want to remove the budget and the variance columns. Maybe I want to add in another one where it does some calculations like percentage. I can build that in by simply coming in here and saying add another column or remove a column. And then simply, in plain English, it's very easy to see what needs to be in here. What's the column header? What's the data that's pulling? Is each of these columns going to be dollar, for that time period, or do we want it to be for a particular project? We can also begin to break out the dimensional structure across the columns. So you may want a report that shows your income and then a column for each individual project. And I can begin to do that with breaking that out into multiple columns and expanding it over the width of the report. We also can build in calculations, filters of what we want it to filter by, what the format's going to look like, and then lastly, permissions and next steps. So once you've got your report built, you can say, how do I want it stored? Do I want it stored as just my own report? Do I want to add it to my dashboard? Do I want to schedule the report to be run? So as you can see, it's very easy to use our report writer to modify the reports, and it's because of the backbone of what it's used, the data that it's using. It's using dimensions that I can easily pick up and use to report on. Now, where a lot of this information is coming from is from the general ledger that lives behind the scenes in Sage Intacct. So if we take a look at the general ledger menu, this is where we're going to see some of the core features for the GL. One, if we go into our general ledger accounts, you're going to see that your account structure is very clean and it's set up. Always on our screens, you always have the ability to export out to Excel. So if you wanted to export this list chart of accounts out to Excel, well, you have the option to do CSV, Excel, Word, or a PDF. Now, with my list of accounts, I'm just going to go grab one and take a look at it here. Let me find a revenue one down here. So when you set up your chart of accounts, you can choose if it's a closing account or a non-closing account, where it closes to, and are there certain dimensions that you want to require, that it always has to tie to a project or it always has to tie back to a customer, etc. Now, also in our general ledger, we're going to be able to set up some user-defined books. So if you have a need to have some additional books aside your standard book, you can build perhaps a tax book or lots of other uses for this that you can be able to post transactions to and then use that book to report against. So some clients have used it to report not only tax, but maybe also commitments, um, changes. It's a way to layer on additional books on top of your general ledger. So these could be things that you want to post to record, but don't necessarily need to pull into your regular day-to-day financials. We have the flexibility to build out as many user-definable books as you need. And then they can be reported on. Also within the general ledger, you're going to find all of your sub-ledgers. So if I take a look here in my company here, we look at our sub-ledgers. Here's the sub-ledgers that a lot of them are standard, but you may have some other ones that you've built that you want to post to. So standard ones like accounts payable, AR, and as I click on view transactions, I can then see all of my AP transactions. I always have the ability to drill down right from the screen and view those transactions. But we'll take a look at our general ledger transactions here. So here's all my GL transactions. And with Sage Intacct, we can build workflows. So if you notice, most of these transactions are posted, but a few are in the submitted status because those two are waiting on approval by somebody else in the company. But then once they are approved, then they will become posted. Again, if you notice at the top, you have the ability to export out to Excel. You can see ones that have got attachments linked to them. And of course, you can always click on the transaction and view it. Then directly from the transaction screen, I'm able to do a reverse. If I need to reverse the entry, duplicate it, or I can also view the history of the transaction. Here I see when it was originally created and by whom, when it was approved and by whom, and if there was any comments, and then it was posted. I also have that chatter where I asked for somebody to attach a report to it. And if I look back on the main transaction screen, we see that that transaction did have the attachment added to it. And I can click on it and drill down. So very user-friendly, very clean windows that I can access all the information I need and pretty much drill down anywhere on that screen. Now, the last piece of the general ledger that I want to mention is that we can also create statistical journal entries. So a lot of times users will create spreadsheets outside the system for information they want to track. Maybe they want to track, hours or square footage or whatever piece of information that sort of exists that you want to run more sophisticated reports or utilize the statistical information. If I click on the transactions, I'm able to post an entry to record that information. So maybe every time I start a new project, I do want to track the square footage of that project. Well, I can make a recording of that square footage, and then that is reportable. So now I can use that 250,000 square feet in reporting to see what my revenue per square foot is or my cost per square foot is, instead of having to pull that information out to Excel, the transactional information out to Excel, and then use that information to then build a report against. So Sage Intacct gives us a lot of flexibility within the general ledger, from being able to define our chart of accounts, build out additional books, track our statistical entries, as well as create budgets for the GL. Now, I have simple budgeting that I can do within the system, that I can first export a budget, make my modifications in Excel, and then import back in the budget to set up the budget for the year. I can have different multiple budgets for the year and use those when I go to run reports. And then Sage Intacct has a more advanced budgeting and planning module that you can add that gives you sort of an ongoing budgeting and planning tool that you can create a budget, you can create what if scenarios, you can send that budget or that section of a budget to a manager to review and approve. So it's a very fluid budgeting process. So if you need a more advanced budgeting solution, you would probably want to look at our Sage budgeting and planning module. So we've talked about where the financial information comes from, and that's what we're seeing that's feeding back to our dashboards when we look at this financial dashboard that we first started with looking at. So now we know a little bit more about the dimensions and how we can break out our reporting to see more details. We talked about that we can use those dimensions to represent different companies and be able to consolidate that information all into one place. We looked at statistical information, and down here we see a chart using that statistical information. But let's talk a little bit about job costing, because that is also a very important component of the construction accounting office. So I'm going to flip to this other dashboard, which is our project performance dashboard. So this has got a slightly different view of the accounting. It's more focused on projects. So in this dashboard, it still has some of the filters at the top that maybe I want to filter on a specific type of project. For example, I want to look at just my warehouses. So I could say I just want to look at the warehouse group. Maybe that's a division within the company. And now it's just going to show me projects that are warehouses. I can see almost like a whip style report here where I'm looking at contract amount, and anything that's blue is hyperlinked. So I could drill down and see that detail. I could look at the estimate for the project, the commitments that are out there. So if I click here, it drills me down into a list of all those commitments that have been set up. Or I want to drill back into the cost. Or maybe I want to flip it. This is what I was saying when we were looking at the report writer, that maybe I want to see a column for each project or each customer, and I can see it looking a little differently. Now, how is Intacct managing that cost in the system? Well, why don't we go take a look at the work breakdown structure. So if I come in here into my projects menu, we go take a look at our cost codes. Here we see the cost codes that have been set up in this sample company. You have a lot of flexibility with your cost code structure, as you see here on the left, some different example setups. We also can set up, there's a parent-child relationship, as you see here. I showed you that in the PowerPoint with the concrete example. And then each line item is tied further to cost type or akin to categories. So if I drill into the cost types, here's the cost types for that cost code. Again, breaking it down into more detail, but each one is tied back to a GL. So as a user keys in data and they pick subcontract, it's going to know that it should post to this general ledger account. So streamlining, hopefully eliminating some of the errors that could occur with data entry. Notice up at the top, we have that export button that we keep seeing, but we also have an import button. There's places all throughout Sage Intacct to import data, whether it's here in the cost code screen, on the budget screen, accounts payable invoices, purchase orders, you can import really wherever. And the nice thing is you can start by exporting and it creates the template that you can then populate to be able to import the data in. Now you can also go one step further if you want to and use the APIs to build an interface to connect data maybe from another program, similar to what Procore, some of the other tools have built. But let's look at a project now that we understand some of the work breakdown structure. So from my project screen, I'm going to take a look at projects here. And here's my project list. We do have parent-child relationships. So some of you guys may be using extras. This would be a way to, have, using a Sage 300 term there. You could have your job with your extras or job with sub-jobs underneath it. And we'll go take a look at a particular job. So I'm going to go into this La Quinta here. So from the job screen, we see if there was a parent project tied to it would be listed here. We also see the customer, and notice it's in blue, so I could drill down to that customer, who my project manager is. And then if I go to my project summary tab, this is a screen that's giving me some summary information. And this screen is customizable. So if there's fields I want to pull in, I can pull in those fields. Now, some things I like to point out are not only do I see, summary of costs, labor costs, contracted costs, and summary of what I've billed, but down here at the bottom, I can also see what my total commitments are. So if somebody is winding down this project and maybe they're thinking of closing out this project, I know that I still have $400,000 in commitments outstanding. So this project has got some invoices that we're still waiting on to come in. I also can see the cost codes that were set up for this project and then our estimates. Now, from my estimate screen, we can, actually, let's take this other project that I want to use. So we can have multiple estimates when we build the project. So on this estimate screen, you see that this project's got several different estimates built for it. It's got an initial estimate. It's got a revised budget. Maybe there's also some projections of what our budget's going to look like in November, and then what it looked like in October. So the user can build multiple budgets that can be reported on. You can choose which one is the primary one. And then you also have the audit history of all the prior budgets. We'll drill down into this particular budget here. Let me make this screen a little bigger. So I could have imported this budget in. I also can duplicate. So if I'm, wanting to make a, projection of what my budget's going to look like in February, I may want to duplicate this, and then I could label it February. I can state if it's active or not. And what's really awesome about Intacct is all these different things are reportable because you're labeling what type of estimate this is. So then when you go into the report writer, you can say, pull in the revised budget in this column versus this column, I want you to have the original budget. So I may be able to then compare the original budget versus the revised. So looking down here at my budget, I see all the different line items. Now, the line items also have workflow built into it, that these are original budget line items. But if you notice, this is a revision. So I'm able to put in that it's a revision and put in the amount, and that can also show up in a separate column. You could label it as forecast or approved change or pending change. These are all now fields that are reportable. So really thinking about reporting and being able to put all this information in one place and then pull it out into a report and separate it in those different columns, comparing, adding together, then being able to see a total picture of the budget and all the phases that those changes and revisions have gone through. So as users start to modify the project budget and add in that this is a revision, you're going to be able to see that broken out into a separate column. There's also an effective date. So if they want to also note the date of the change, then you could even be able to draw more of a picture of the project and break it out by month and see how it changes the project over the course of the budget for the project. And those effective dates can be utilized when reporting, not only for just budgeting purposes, but when we want to compare budget versus actual. If I know that this change isn't going to affect the budget until April, then when I'm running reports through this month, you're not going to see those changes until you run it through that time period. So very flexible tool in the project budgeting side. Of a lot of different choices of noting changes and what type of changes they are, having multiple budgets that I then can run comparisons against. So once my project is set up, we can then do our usual entering in purchase orders, which will become, or subcontracts, which become commitments and accounts payable invoices, but we're not going to get into all of that today. I do want to show us a report, and then we'll touch on the dashboard, and then we'll wrap up. So we also have a report writer. It's called the Interactive Custom Report Writer. And this report writer allows us to bring in data. It's a very similar report writer, except for it taps into beyond just the financial data. So here is simple whip style report where I see contract amount, actuals. These reports can be exported out to Excel. You also can email them directly out of here, or add them to the dashboard. And if we choose to memorize it, we can schedule it to be run. Lots of different ways that you can utilize the report writer. Bring up another version of it, another version of a report here. So here's a cost overview that's bringing in those estimated changes. I could pick a different job. Maybe I want to look at one of these warehouse jobs. It shows that information. So just lets me pick, switch to different jobs that I want to review. And then I can also, depending on how the report is built, you do have the option of expanding and seeing some more data. Maybe we want to expand and see the cost type or category. So it now has added that in and broken out the report in a little bit more detail. So this is similar to when you run an inquiry and drill down. You're now able to get that in a report style view. So we can see changes, see how all of the budget versus actual is affected. So we were able to review the project, see how the project work breakdown structure can be set up, how that ties in with cost types, tying with our cost codes, that connect with the general ledger. And then coming back to my project performance report, now we see where we're pulling in some of this information from the jobs, from committed costs, all into one place. So I'm able to manage all of my projects as well as my financials from one system without having to go outside and build Excel spreadsheets. I can view all that information in one place. So I hope today has been a good overview and introduction to Sage Intacct. We'd love to speak with you further, and if there are any questions, I know we went over a few minutes. I'm available to stay on and answer any questions that may have come up.